Welcome to the Confidence Through Health podcast. My name is Jerry Snyder. As a health, wellness, and sports performance coach, my goal each week is to bring you experts to help you take control of your health and build your self-confidence. Thanks for including me today on your journey to better health. As an elite level runner and coach, I'm excited to introduce you to the All In Running Club. The All In Running Club exists to help you become a better runner. Whether you're a beginner, an elite runner, or anywhere in between, the mission of the All In Running Club is to give you the tools you need to find your success in running. Join today to take advantage of the 75% off yearly membership rate offer. Click the link below in the show notes to learn more. So thank you, Dr. Biamonte, for being a guest on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
Well, it's my pleasure.
So you have, in like one of the first things I want to ask is you've got a specialty in clinical nutrition. And so how is that for people listening? How is that different from a dietitian that they maybe are more familiar with?
Oh my God, it's a huge difference.
Right.
We have totally different training. Dietitians learn basic nutrition, basic chemistry, and then their job is to feed people in institutions.
Right.
So they have to be knowledgeable about how you order enough bulk food to feed X amount of people. They have to have the economics of that at hand, so they don't overorder. They don't cause a problem with wasting money, wasting food.
Right.
So it's food service management is what a dietitian is.
Right.
Some dietitians start to study some of the things that I learned, or it will take weekend seminars into things that I know.
Okay.
And those dietitians then can be elevated up to the position of clinical nutrition. What I do is clinical nutrition and clinical ecology. And in New York State, very interesting, Governor Cuomo, back in I think it was the late 80s, when we first got licensed in New York State, the then Governor Cuomo was smart enough and sharp enough to see and recognize that there was a distinct difference between a dietitian and a clinical nutritionist. And on my New York State certification diploma, let's say, it actually has CN, clinical nutritionist, where dietitians have a D something, some kind of designation, but it is actually designated as being different.
Right. And it's that digging more into what's the nutrition really doing in the body on an individual basis versus the overall.
Understanding the biochemistry. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't comment on the fact that we had back in the 80s what I call the dietitian wars. Dietitians back then, the title dietitian had so been besmirked by people thinking of Jell-O and artificial potatoes that they tried to take our title clinical. They wanted the title clinical nutritionist, and they didn't want us to practice. And in New York State particularly, they did a lot of underhanded things to try to pass bills without us knowing about it. But luckily we had some people working for us who were lobbyists, and these people were able to catch this stuff at the last minute, and we were able to educate the people in New York State, the governor, especially the governor, Governor Cuomo, for whatever anybody wants to think about his legacy or what he did or whatever, or his son or whatever. I have to say he did the right thing by us.
Yeah. So one of the things that you've gotten into is understanding the nutrition side of it and how it affects the microbiome, right?
Yes, that's been my expertise quite by accident for the last 30 years or so.
Okay. So how by accident? What was the accident that led to that?
Well, when I first got out of school, I was working at Grumman Aerospace with a team of aerospace physiologists and nutritionists and biochemists. The man who was my boss was the fellow who developed the lunar module life support systems.
Okay.
And Grumman gave him the task of coming up with a computer that can analyze the blood results of an astronaut while he was in space, in order to determine how much protein he should get, what vitamins he should take, because there's a problem with when you're in weightlessness for that long with losing calcium from your bone and losing muscle mass. So he put together this whole team of people to do this, and I was one of them. And when we were working with this computer software, it was really pretty unbelievable, because for those of you who know the books I'm about to quote, this computer's program was like literally like you took Harper's biochemistry book and Guyton's physiology book, and you put them all in a computer where the computer could run in sequence somebody's biochemistry based on those books.
Oh, wow.
And the computer would tell us exactly where the breakdown was in the pathway.
Yeah.
Therefore, the person needed this vitamin or this mineral or this nutritional substance. And we had people getting amazing results with arthritis and asthma and all these illnesses, diabetes. But there was about 30%, I would say, maximum 30% of the people who, when they took the vitamins, had strange reactions. Okay. It was like the vitamin was acting toxic in their system. They couldn't tolerate them. Right. So I volunteered to find out why this was. And the first thing I thought of is it was well known at the time that people who have low stomach acid had drug reactions. Like medical doctors know if a person can't tolerate a drug, one of the first things you look at is if they have low stomach acid. Yeah. So I looked at that and I found out, yes, they all did, but it wasn't, there was more to it than that. And eventually I got all their blood work and I looked for common denominators, and I found out they had this odd pattern in their white blood cells that would indicate some kind of infection or disruption in their microbiome. Now, in those days, the word microbiome didn't even exist.
Right. Yeah.
Didn't even exist.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough to make friends with two doctors who were running a laboratory back then called Great Smoky's Lab. It was in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And Great Smoky's Lab nowadays is called Genova Labs. But back in those very beginning days, I went to them with this problem, and they allowed me to do stool tests on these patients for free. And it was interesting because how they did it is we ran the stool test on them every day for a week. And then we were looking for variations of what would come up.
Right.
So we found out that when you were looking for bacteria and you were looking for normal flora, it was just, the test was stable. But when it came to candida and yeasts, it was completely unstable. One day the person would have a 4+ candida, which is the maximum. Next day, nothing.
Huh.
Next day, 1+. Next day, 3+. It was all over the map.
Yeah.
But it confirmed the fact that these people had an imbalance in their bacteria. None of them had lactobacillus. None of them had bifidus. They were all extremely low or non-existent. So that gave me my first clue that what I was dealing with was candida or some kind of dysbiosis.
Right. And so why is that dysbiosis such a deal breaker for some people when it comes to like absorbing nutrients and being able to get, like, they could take a ton of supplements and not see any results from it?
Well, I think the PR on probiotics for the most part tells the story.
Yeah.
Because probiotics are necessary for the absorption of nutrients,
right,
for the creation or the synthesis of certain B vitamins. The probiotics are your first line in the immune system.
Right.
There are actually 6 parts to the immune system, and the very first line of defense are your probiotics. And not only that, but there are some other things we learned over the years about the microbiome, which I never had a clue. And one of them was that a microbiome is used to literally shuffle neurotransmitters and hormones in and out of your bloodstream. So if your bloodstream is suddenly, if your body senses in your bloodstream, you suddenly have too much, let's say, serotonin, or too much estrogen, your body sucks that neurotransmitter and hormone out of your blood and puts it into your intestinal tract.
Okay.
And it's like a holding tank for that. And it shuffles them back and forth constantly. And it can't do that unless you have correct biome.
Right.
Years ago, it was what was really chic to talk about was detoxification, phase 1 and phase 2. And what we didn't know back then was that bifidus was essential for phase 1 to take place.
Yeah.
Because everyone talked about phase 2 and glutathione. But if you don't have enough bifidus bacteria in your colon, your phase 1 detoxification, which is conjugating toxins with the liver, doesn't work.
Right.
And the more we looked into what probiotics did and how essential they were, the more staggering it became.
So is there, I'm assuming there are, because you sort of hit on this earlier, but there's tests available to see, do I have the right ingredients basically in my
Yeah,
microbiome for this to work, right?
there are tests. The tests have gotten better and better every year,
Yeah.
especially tests for the biome themselves itself. And um, there are several labs out there that have really great stool tests nowadays. And
Okay.
part of the stool test always includes a DNA panel, where rather than looking for the microbe with the standard microscope and culture, they look for the DNA of the microbe, which makes it even
Mm.
more interesting.
Yeah. So if you don't have, let's say you do the test and you're missing something, um, how easy is it to get that to start coming back into
Not
your
very,
system?
not
Oh,
very.
really?
You see, because this is something that I worked out back in those early days with the guys from Great Smoky's lab.
Mhm.
If you're lacking acidophilus, it automatically means you have candida overgrowth in your small intestine.
Okay.
If you're lacking bifidus bacteria, it's an automatic positive for candida in your colon, because those are the bacteria that stop the candida from growing. And
Okay.
if they're absent, it doesn't make any difference what else is going on. They're going to overgrow.
Right.
So in order to balance things, you have to get rid of the candida first.
Right.
And that's what that and if you read my book, The Candida Chronicles, and by the way, it's called The Candida Chronicles because it chronicles my own personal journey for 20 years of untangling every trick that candida could play
Yeah.
and how it would avoid being removed.
Wow.
And it's not easy to get rid of candida. Most
Yeah.
doctors don't do it. There are a lot of multi level marketing companies that have products that claim they get rid of candida in a couple of
Right.
weeks or whatever, and it's all PR, it's all nonsense. They're all trying to sell you something.
Right.
How I know what I do is correct is because I test people.
Yeah.
I have definitive tests for candida, which I do at the beginning and throughout the treatment, and then when the treatment is over, I test the person to to confirm the candida is gone and that their friendly bacteria is back. That's
Okay.
why I could. That's why the claims I make in terms of how things work are going to be valid.
So is it, if once it's gone, does the good bacteria automatically come back, or do you
No,
have to you have to do something to get it to start growing again?
yeah, and that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Getting rid of the candida once you know the tricks it plays is not that hard. Getting the good bacteria to come back involves changing the environment in the gut to make it very favorable for the good
Mhm.
bacteria, making
Right.
sure the gut is completely disinfected of anything that's going to repel it, and then making sure the integrity of the intestinal lining is such that it will accept the good bacteria and allow it to hold on.
Right.
So, and then there's food sources for the good bacteria. In a lot of ways, it's like gardening. And I've said this many times before. You don't just plant seeds in the ground and hope it rains and hope it all works. You
Right.
plant the seeds and then you get on a specific schedule of watering it, of feeding it, and of also making sure other bad things don't come and eat the seeds, right?
Right.
So when
Right.
you're gardening, anybody who's a farmer or somebody with a home garden, there are a lot of perils you're up against. It's not just throwing seeds there. Well,
Yeah.
it's extremely similar in terms of your own biome.
And so that process can take obviously more time than some of these things claim. They can get rid
Oh
of
yeah,
it and
it can take
rebuild it.
to get your biome back from the point in time when your candida's gone, just to get your biome back and get it strong is could be easily 3 months. Three
Yeah.
months could be an average.
Yeah. And so during that time, like for somebody going through that, for the typical person going through that, I can imagine that at many points during that 3 months or longer, they're going to want to give up because of the discomfort.
Yes, not only the discomfort, but then they can't drink beer, they can't
Right.
eat sugar, they can't eat a lot of pasta, they can't have like their favorite things.
Right.
There's going to be that, and then there's also the discipline in having to take the nutrients that you need to take or take the supplements.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of challenges. Yeah, I really
Yeah.
respect the patients we have who complete the program. You really got to respect because you're up against life when you're trying to do this.
Right. Right. And
And what did John Lennon say? Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's what you're up against.
Right. And so if you've got this situation where you're in dysbiosis and you start feeding yourself stuff thinking that, okay, this is going to help, but you haven't addressed the dysbiosis. Let's say you buy this supplement and that supplement and all these things that claim that they're going to be able to do all these things. You're basically just creating expensive waste, right?
What I tell my patients now, those who could handle this kind of humor, is I'll tell them, well, they'll ask me, well, can I take this, and this? I said, you could, but a better idea would be go into the bathroom to the toilet and just open up the jar and pour it directly in the toilet
Right.
and save yourself having to swallow it.
Yeah. Because it's not gonna be absorbed.
No,
You're not gonna do anything with it. And
no, no.
except just give yourself this false sense that during this short time period, I'm doing something to fix myself.
Unfortunately, you make yourself worse.
Right.
There's a list of, we have two lists. We have one list of nutrients which actually feeds candida and other bad bacteria. And then we have another list of nutrients which stop the medicines you would take, like the botanicals, from being able to eliminate them.
Mm. Okay.
So that's the two sides of it.
Yeah.
Is nutrients that stop your antifungals or your botanicals that are supposed to kill the dysbiosis from working, and then the other side is nutrients that's actually going to feed the dysbiosis and make it worse.
Right. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't. I mean, I obviously they don't, because the situation in our country, the health situation is so horrible that we have no clue that it's not just that, like, oh, we need to add this or that because it's a healthy item. It's like we got to get rid of all the stuff that's unhealthy too. Like, it's a
Yeah.
two-part situation.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of money out there that doesn't want to do that.
Right. Right.
You have number one, the drug companies that don't want people to know anything about any of this, because
Right.
then I learned this a long time ago. As far as the drug company goes, the drug company tells the medical doctor, you never want to kill the patient. That's
Right.
unacceptable. And you never want to cure the patient. That's equally unacceptable.
Right.
Because then he's not buying the prescription.
Yep.
Then you have big food and big pharma can be thought of as being so related. Because here you've got people eating genetically modified, non-organic food, which makes them sick. Then they have to go to the drug companies to get pills to cover up their symptoms because they're eating this food. I can't tell you how many times my patients will go to Italy, in particular, Italy or France, and they go there and they eat things that are off their diet, and miraculously their reactions are much, much less than if they were here. And the reason for that is in Italy and France, they don't have GMO food.
Yeah.
Everything there is just naturally organic.
Yeah.
To find food there that's not organic is actually a bit of a difficulty.
Yeah.
So when you're eating that food, you're not going to have the inflammation and the reactions and the mast cell activity and all the other stuff that you get here eating this junk in America. And we're supposed to be so superior, but we're not when it comes to these things.
Right. Now, I have a friend that just went to Italy over the holidays, and she and her husband, and they were like, I think they were there for like 10 days. And she was like, we ate bread at every single meal, and I didn't gain any weight, and I didn't have any reactions. And she was like, what is so different? And I was just like, oh, that's actually like natural compared to what we have over here.
Yeah. The other thing is too, in Italy and France, I think throughout most of Europe, they tend to eat their pasta more al dente than we eat it here in America. And that makes a big difference in terms of the glycemic index of the pasta.
Right.
Al dente pasta is much lower glycemic index rated than the pasta that's sloppy and mushy.
Right. And when it comes to, if you've got something like candida, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but that feeds off of sugar, correct?
Yes, feeds off starches and sugars.
Right. And so if you're raising your glycemic index, so you're creating stuff that's even sugary or got more sugar content to it, and more like you think that you're doing something because it tastes better, but like it's bringing great harm to your body.
Yeah, because you're feeding the enemy, essentially.
Yeah. And so once you get rid of candida, is that something that, like, you talked about the respect that you have for the people that go through the process and the discipline that they have. is that something they have to stick with the rest of their life, or can they relax those restrictions a little bit?
Actually, they don't have to in most circumstances,
Okay.
because once you get rid of the bad pathogens in your or the dysbiosis and you reestablish your flora, a
Mhm.
normal balance will return that you can hold without having to be so crazy with the diet. But
Right.
one of the things that we find that's really helpful is if when they conclude this and they're ready to go off a candida diet, if they eat a diet that's per their blood type.
Mhm.
People who eat a diet that's more per their blood type, per Dr. Diadamo's work,
Mhm.
they do much better than people who just go back to eating the average American diet or the standard
Right.
American diet, which we call
Right.
SAD.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so it's a lifestyle change with an call it an extreme initial beginning, but then you're still going to be changing your lifestyle later on.
Sure. I mean, look at the comment from a common sense model.
Mhm.
What got them there to return to what you were doing when you arrived at this bad point wouldn't make sense.
Right.
Because if that was good, why did you end up with this problem? And they'll say,
Right.
well, I took antibiotics and I did that. Well, that's true, but not everybody who takes an antibiotic gets candida.
Right.
Sure, you're at a great risk for getting candida when you take antibiotics
Right.
or prednisone or any of these other medications, but still not everybody gets it full blown to this point where they have to seek
Right.
help.
Right.
So then obviously doing whatever you were doing before wasn't working. So you've got to find a path that's going to keep you on the straight and narrow.
Right. And and to touch on, you said antibiotics but other medications as well is like there there's a piece of it. It's like, especially in an acute situation, okay, you need this to save your life, take the medication. But a lot of times in the chronic, medication situations where you're taking these things, the side effects are often much worse on your body than what the symptoms you're trying to mask,
Yeah,
correct?
well, it's almost comical nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, and I would say that in terms of crisis medicine,
Hmm.
heroic intervention, we are probably the best in the world. In
Right.
terms of handling chronic illnesses, we're pathetic.
Yeah.
It's pathetic because when you turn on the TV and you see these advertisements come on for all these medications and drugs, after like you hear all these side effects.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know anybody who says, "Jade, I'm damn well. I want to get on that drug right away. I mean, I can't wait
Right.
to have my nose fall off and become
Yeah.
impotent and on and on."
Yeah.
So it's pretty bad. But this is unfortunately how things have evolved. Going back to John D. Rockefeller.
Right.
John D. Rockefeller discovered that he could take coal tar, which is a waste product of his, use it to make medicines. He could make
Yeah.
the take the coal tar and reproduce the active ingredient in different medications,
Right.
synthesize it. So
Yeah.
that's when John D. Rockefeller then started his campaign against homeopaths, against naturopaths, because he wanted to put the allopath, which is the drug surgery medicine
Right.
we have now, he wanted to put that in front so that the drug companies would grow the way they have.
Yeah.
They're not interested in finding causes. It's interesting that in different states in this country, it's illegal for you to say you can cure a disease.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's illegal,
Yeah.
which is crazy. But
Yep.
in naturopathic school, or even people who go to for clinical nutrition training, you're taught to look for causes.
Right.
And normally that's done via the lab work you're going to run on the person. You want to find the cause of where their biochemical failure or shutdown is. And then you want to balance their nutrition, change their diet, give them the right supplements to get everything working again,
Right.
which is not how doctors are trained.
No, not at all. And in that piece of the puzzle of the supplement is something that it we need to start thinking of it differently than like the massive supplement market that's out there, the billions of dollars that are gone into the supplement market, and think of it more as that I need a fine-tuned idea of these specific things that I need to supplement my diet.
The obvious thing, I think, at least I hope for people, is that the doctor of the future
Mhm.
will run tests on a person. He's going to look at their tests from a like a genetic standpoint, like the 23andMe, that type of company. Right. He's going to get genetic tests to show him what genetic weaknesses my patient has in terms of their biochemistry and their health. Right. And the test will then tell him what nutrients that person may need from a genetic standpoint. Right. Then he's going to run functional tests, which are going to tell you where that person is right now in real time. Right. And then compare both of them in order to come up with a treatment plan or a lifestyle plan for that person. This is what makes sense to me. Yeah. If we do that, our health in this country will improve dramatically, because we're not just taking because somebody can get into using vitamins like a drug also.
Oh, yeah.
You can do that very easily. Massive doses of vitamin B6 are a tremendous diuretic. Yeah. Really high doses of vitamin A can knock out a sinus infection, can knock out excessive mucus production in your lungs and sinuses and whatnot. So you can use nutrients like drugs, but that's not really where they belong. Right. As we have a physiological response to a nutrient that is, let's say, a food or a supplement. That's the nutrient working in your body as it's supposed to, as God intended. Then you can have a pharmacological reaction where you're using the nutrient as a drug. But then you could also have a toxicological reaction where you take so much of the nutrient where it's actually toxic to you. Right. So we have to learn the difference and these gradients so that we know, as you're saying, we have to look at vitamins from the viewpoint of how the vitamins are going to keep me at my ideal health. Right. As opposed to buying the vitamin because there's somebody on TV telling me that now it's the time to buy CoQ10 because that's what's in vogue.
Right. Right. And it's funny because I take CoQ10, and a lot of people have asked me, when they hear about that or see it or whatever, and they're like, why do you take it? You don't have a heart problem. You don't have, you're a healthy guy. I'm like, no, I take it because it strengthens my cell walls.
Right. And you don't want to have.
And I don't want to have all those things.
Right. Because CoQ10 is going to oxygenate your muscles. That's the thing. CoQ10 oxygenates the muscles. And what is the heart is a muscle also. So that's where it could benefit that. But it is in general that's benefiting you. So there you go.
Right. And so it's knowing those things as opposed to just seeing an ad on TV and saying that says, take this for heart problems. If you go, I don't have heart problems, so I don't need that. But it has so many other applications potentially. At least some things do have so many other applications throughout the body that may be the missing piece that you're not adding in.
Yes. And then we have the backside of this, which is what people don't understand and which throws the vitamin companies again into a horrific shock, which is why they want to kill me half the time, is if you take too much of a nutrient, it imbalances your body. We were taught over the last 20, 30 years that you can take all the vitamins you want and it doesn't make a difference because they're water soluble. You're just going to pee them out. But be careful of vitamin A because vitamin A is fat soluble. This is kind of what you're taught in the health food store era. Right. Which is not true. If you take too much vitamin B1, you'll pull the calcium right out of your teeth. Yeah. If you take too much copper, you'll increase the person's sensitivity to estrogen. Right. You'll depress your thyroid function and your adrenal function. And I can go through every nutrient and explain what an excess of that nutrient is going to do to imbalance the person. So this is where I go back to testing. Right. Testing is the only way to know. Because you can't go by what's on the soapbox now, as far as because every 10 years, we used to joke about this. Every 10 years there was a nutrient. Back in the 70s, it was vitamin E. Right. And in the 70s, they had the show The Love Namath on. And Joe Namath, the great quarterback, he was on the show as a guest. And his deal was he was a big Casanova going after all the girls. Mm-hmm. And he had this little bottle of vitamin E that he kept in his pocket all the time. And he was popping them every 10 minutes. Yeah. And so that was the era of vitamin E. Then you had magnesium when we knew that Jim Fixx, the runner, who was very famous, he died of a heart attack. And we found out the reason he died was he had magnesium deficiency. Yeah. Then you move. So it's every decade there's another nutrient that's been the thing. Right. So we have to get away from that. We have to understand all these nutrients work together. And unless you're tested, you don't know what you need. And you could be taking something in excess that's actually making you more imbalanced.
Right. And that's the thing. Like you maybe you have a correct balance of calcium, but you're taking other stuff that's pulling it out. And if you think, oh, I have, and this is one of the things that I have a family member that over the holidays was asking me about, like, their doctor said that they had an abundance of or no, that they were they were deficient in B12. And I was like, well, what are you taking? And she was like, well, I take a B12 and I take a B complex. And I'm like, then you're not deficient in B12. You're deficient in your uptake. There's something else that's going on that's disrupting your ability to get B12 into your body. It's like
There
you're
is an
providing
interest.
it, but you just can't get enough of it uptake, right?
There's an interesting phenomena with B12 that we learned recently. There, for years, we've seen people who were not taking B12 who had really high levels of B12 in their blood,
Mm-hmm.
and in their hair, they would have high levels of cobalt, which is
Right,
the manifestation of B12 in your hair or in a cell.
right.
And what we found is that the problem was they didn't have enough vitamin B2, riboflavin.
Mm,
So anyone who has a high level of B12 who's not taking B12, what they need to take is vitamin B2 because
yeah,
vitamin B2 activates the B12. And
right.
we found that when we gave those people vitamin B2, the B12 levels came down to normal.
Right. And so that's the piece that like you said, the testing piece. And all that testing stuff is totally available.
Oh yeah, easily.
It's and I would say if you go to a doctor who and you say, hey, I want to look into getting these tests to see where my vitamin and mineral levels are. And if they're not willing to do that, you probably need to go see somebody else.
Yeah, I would agree because if they're not willing to look, now granted that particular doctor may not be trained in this, he
Right.
may not know the
Right.
right lab or the right tests, but at least if he's willing to look, you've
Yeah.
got somebody there who's willing to learn,
Yeah.
as opposed to him, the doctor saying, "Well, what is that? What you don't need that?
Yeah.
That's all baloney." And now, but I think doctors nowadays, medical doctors are turned around a bit because they have gone so long with that dogmatic attitude that vitamins or nutrition doesn't work
Yeah.
and vitamin or doesn't matter and
Yeah.
vitamins and nutrition are so in the forefront now,
Right.
especially celebrities making it popular, different diets and programs and workouts and all this. The doctors are now getting kind of embarrassed if they don't
Yeah.
know something about it.
Right. Well, and you mentioned diets, and because we all know somebody who's been successful on every single diet that's out there, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so it's like whether it's a fad diet or an actual like thought out scientific, this is the way it should be. We all know people have been successful. We all know people that haven't been successful. And so that success or inability to reach your goals, that really does boil down to what's going on in your gut, right?
To a degree, the bigger picture is your own biochemical individuality.
Okay. Okay.
I wouldn't say the
Um,
gut. The gut is definitely part of it, but the
yeah.
bigger picture is you as a biochemical unique creature. And I'll tell you a story. This has happened to me when I was in nutrition school. Vegetarianism was a big thing,
Right.
so I became a vegetarian, and I was friendly with other vegetarians. And
Right.
after about 5 years of being a vegetarian, I started to notice that my skin was getting dry. I was getting muscle ticks, twitches, and tremors, and it just something wasn't right.
Yeah.
And at that point, I did my very first hair analysis of myself, and I found out my metabolism had gone really slow.
Okay.
And I went into class this day, and I told the teacher. Now, luckily for me, the teacher happened to be Dr. Diadamo Sr.,
Oh, wow.
Peter's father. And now, so here I have the perfect guy here. I
Yeah.
really pulled this in. And I say, Dr. Diadamo, I told him the whole story. And I had a friend who was a pianist who was having the same things. And when he was playing the piano, all of a sudden his fingers would stop. They wouldn't stop moving
Right.
or they would
Right.
cramp.
Yeah.
So he listens to the whole story and he says, "What's your blood type?" And now I didn't know that this man spent the last 20 years traveling all over the world studying all these different blood types. I didn't really know who he was.
Yeah.
So I told him I don't really know, to be honest with you, but he's asked me about my mother and my father and where they were born. So he says, "You're probably a type O." And he was right. I was.
Okay.
He says, "I want you and your friend to go for the next week and eat liver every day. Now he's telling these two vegetarians to eat liver every day, right?
Right.
So I'm thinking, geez. All right. So we went ahead and did it. Within 3 days, all our symptoms were gone
Oh, wow.
of eating this liver. 3 days, symptoms gone. And that taught, we didn't continue to eat liver every day, but
Right.
it told us we needed animal protein. Then
Right.
he further explained in class what happens with your blood chemistries when you don't have enough animal protein. Your BUN levels start to drop and your amino acid pool starts to drop. And he was showing the comparison between that and a blood type A that doesn't happen in a blood type A
Okay.
because their bodies are used to a different type of protein. Blood type
Right.
A's are farmers, and they're much more. Their bodies are more adept at eating carbs, eating grains, eating seeds, and this like that. Where the
Right.
blood type O is the hunter gatherer, and he's the one out hunting the animal who's eating the animal.
Okay.
And then he made a joke about Eskimos. He said, "Now, the extreme of this would be what if you took a boatload of Eskimos and you brought them down to Key West, Florida, and you had them living on fruits?
Right.
How do you think that would go? Common sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This Eskimo is used to eating fish and
Right.
blubber and
Right.
all of this high fat, high protein thing. How is he going to do? So that's
Yeah.
what
It's
kind of
going to
set me
struggle.
straight into understanding that we were individual
Right.
biochemically.
Right.
Now, the blood type diet is somewhat controversial because people will not want to follow it, I think is
Yeah.
really the reason.
Yeah.
But if you do study the blood type diet and you follow it, you will get a lot of benefits from it. Is it 100% accurate all the time for everybody? No, it's not. But then again, nothing is.
Right. Right.
But
Well,
it's
and
a
it,
very good foundation. It's a good
yeah.
foundation to start with.
Well, I think that's the big key for people is once you know that you've got your body in a healthy state to start, you've made sure that you don't have any candida, you don't make sure you've got balanced hormones, you've got balanced everything. Then to go from that point moving forward is look at, okay, here's, the diet that I should follow, and I'm going to do 90% of this as it says, and then tweak here and there to make it my own. Would you say that's accurate?
I'd have to agree with that. Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Because that's why I think and I tell people like when I eat like my spouse does, and I'm like, okay, well that's great, but unless you both came from the same place, like you're probably going to need to eat differently, you know
Right.
like people with an Irish background, well, they can eat potatoes and all the stuff and all the starches and not have a bunch of a problem because that's what they're used to.
Ancestors. Yeah, their ancestors did. That's
Yeah.
true.
And so yeah, that makes total sense to look at that and say, which again comes into the testing and the ancestry and the genetics. And once you get all that and having somebody that can understand it to be able to read it to you,
Hmm.
to tell you, here's our starting point for diet and nutrition plan, and then tweak it as you go. And from what I've found for myself, like once I got myself on a diet that I was like, okay, I know I can have these things and I can stay in this realm. And if I go off of it here and there and I don't have a reaction, I'm like, okay, I can have those things.
Hmm.
If I go off and have a reaction, I probably can't have those things,
Yes, that's good. A good hint.
you know? And I think that's one of the things that so many people especially in the US, we're in such a poor state all the time. We don't know what makes us feel bad.
That's true. Well, we're half drugged up. I mean,
Right. That
if you
too.
look at it between psychiatric drugs and even just prescription drugs, there's a
Yeah.
lot of people. If you listen, prescription drugs for different metabolic problems, you hear there's a host of symptoms that appear psychological that could
Hmm.
occur with those.
Right.
So, and then you have the fact that now have you can buy marijuana anywhere,
Right.
and the marijuana gummies, so that
Yep.
they're basically drugging society so that society doesn't know what's going on or
Right.
is not aware of what your health is.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's a there's a sad agenda on the other side of that too, that I think is like, well, once you reach a certain age, we don't need you anymore because you can't
Oh, well,
procreate,
yeah,
right? You're not valuable in
well,
the workforce. And so it's like, okay, what can we do to make and I've told this in sort of in a joking way to some people. I'm like, but if you and I haven't traveled the world extensively, but when you travel to other countries, yes, you notice that the food, there's a difference there, but everybody could pick out Americans. If you
Mm,
go somewhere else, everybody can pick out Americans because we're bigger than everybody else,
right.
both weight and height, you know,
It's all the
and
growth. It's all the growth
yeah,
hormone from the milk
yeah,
and from the
exactly.
animals that we eat, all, that are all injected with growth hormone.
Yep,
It adds up after a while.
it does. And it's, and I think a lot of it goes back to, you know, from both a military standpoint and an athletic standpoint, we want to go to the Olympics and have the best athletes. And so how do you do that? You build the best, biggest humans that you can get. But the same thing on the military side, if you want to intimidate somebody, you show up with a big, huge, muscular person, and they're going to be an intimidating factor.
There you go. Yep, that's true.
So, which again comes down to it's what you eat, and not just what you eat as far as like eat an apple or versus some McNuggets, but knowing where that apple came from.
Mm, true.
So, um, well, Dr. Biamonte, how can we support you? How can we, I know you've got your Center for Clinical Nutrition. How can people support you and connect with you?
They can find me on the internet.
Okay.
We have 3 websites. We have the New York City Thyroid Doctor, the New York City Candida Doctor, and we have our main website, which is health-truth.com.
Awesome. And I love that because there is so much mistruth out there about health. Um, and so I love that you're trying to get the information out there correctly to people so they can understand what's going on in their body.
And as far as what's current, there's a few books I'd recommend for people to read.
Okay.
I'm not even going to plug mine because mine's specifically about candida, but
Yeah.
just in terms of what's happening worldwide with health,
Yeah.
Dr. Joseph Mercola wrote a great book a couple of years ago, which is called The Truth About COVID-19
Mhm.
and the Economic Reset.
Okay.
His books are really enlightening
Yeah.
because he really names names and tells you where it's really at.
Right.
And then I would say virtually any book written by Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Okay.
is gonna slam you because he just lets it rip.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called the Real Anthony Fauci,
Okay.
and he has all of Anthony Fauci's emails
Nice.
that he used as the base of this book.
Yeah.
And what you can't get past the 3rd page on this book without saying, "Oh my God, have we been hoodwinked?"
Right.
To quote W.C. Fields.
Yep. Yep. No, I think we definitely have been. And it's unfortunate that that we went through that, but I think there is a movement of people understanding the change that needs to happen. In starting and ultimately it starts with food. Like because if we can't get the GMO crap out, then like it's going to be very difficult to overcome what it's doing inside our body.
Look at what's the best way to control people.
Yep.
They'll control
Yep.
their food source.
Yep.
Look at Hitler. Hitler would dump fluoride in the drinking water before he attacked an area.
Yep.
So that's the key.
Yep.
Control the food, and you got it.
Yep. Well, Dr. Biamonte, I want to thank you for being a guest. I will link your websites in the show notes so people can connect with you and get with you. Is there anything else that maybe we didn't talk about that you would want people to know about taking control of their own health in their own way?
The best thing for people to do is to eat organic, eat non-GMO. That's where you start.
Yep. Yep.
That's where you start.
Perfect.
And go out and get some testing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's huge. You gotta know where you're at before you can really make any big changes.
Yep, I agree. There you go.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, my friend.
Thanks for checking out the Confidence Through Health podcast. Please subscribe, post a review, share this episode with those you love who need a little extra help with their health journey. Visit allinhealthandwellness.com to learn more about the coaching programs that I provide. All episodes are produced by the Social Media Cowboys, your source for all online marketing needs. Go to socialmediacowboys.com for more information.